Makasaysayang araw po sa ating lahat. Ako po si Xiao Chua para sa Vibal Group. Welcome to Kasaysayan, Kaysaya. Ayan, mga kaibigan, marami pong salamat sa pagsama po niyo sa akin ngayong umagang ito. Ayun, nakakatuwa kasi matagal po tayong hindi nagkita dahil ako po ay nag-focus po sa aking pagsusulat ng dissertation. Medyo umusad naman po tayo pero pasukan na ulit kaya nagkikita tayo ulit ngayong araw na ito. So, ulit, pinapasalamatan ko ang ating boss dyan sa Vibal Group, si Sir Gaspar Vibal, sa pagkakataon na binibigay niya. Alam niyo po, I just have to tell this, ang laki ng tulong ng Vibal Group sa ating mga teachers ngayong pandemic. 'Di ba? Sila yung nagpauso na kakasimula pa lamang po ng ating lockdowns, magkaroon ng initiative na magkaroon ng iba't ibang webinars. Naging hari ng webinar ang Vibal Group. At hanggang ngayon, tuloy-tuloy po ang pagbibigay serbisyo, nagbibigay ng sertipiko, nagbibigay ng training. Makakatulong po ito sa ating mga teachers. Salamat din kay Paul Baloha sa ating marketing, kay Che Gatus, Paul Baloha, of course, the creator of this show. Thank you very much. At ang Paul, I think pwede ko na sigurong i-announce na bagamat we are slated na 10 lamang po ang ating Kasaysayan Kaysaya at ito nga po yung 9th episode natin. Supposedly next week po magtatapos na po tayo. Sinasabi ko sa atin ni Paul na tuloy-tuloy po ang Kasaysayan Kaysaya in the meantime. So, mayroon lang mga ilang pagbabago na pag-uusapan kami. Pero ibig sabihin, after next Sunday, magkikita-kita pa po tayo. Lalong-lalo na sa ating mga social science teachers, Araling Panlipunan teachers, alay po natin sa inyo. Naiiyak ako. Sorry. Maraming salamat. At yun na nga, kaya ginawa natin tong episode na ito para maintindihan din natin ano po yung Agham Panlipunan. Kasi marami sa atin, Araling Panlipunan teachers. So nagkakalituhan po. Nagkakalituhan yung Araling Panlipunan at Agham Panlipunan. Pero alam nyo, hindi lang naman po kayo ang nalilito. Marami yung nalilito kasi halimbawa, puntahan natin yung aking course, yung history. Okay. Yung history, bilang isang subject, hindi alam ng mga tao kung yan ba ay ilalagay sa arts. Bakit? Kasi ang history ay literature, ay pagsusulat. Sining yan eh. If you're going to read Agoncillo's works, di ba? It's very imaginative in many ways. Kahit na yan ay tungkol sa truth, tungkol sa facts, very imaginative. No? Pero, some people would say, no, that's not art. No? Kasi di ba, we're talking about humanities. Di ba? Humanities. No? May humanities, may arts, may social sciences. Now, people will say, hindi yan sa arts. Yan ay sa social science. Bakit? Because ang art daw, imagination, minsan nag-iimbento ka, di ba? Based on yung creativity. But historians, they said they do not create. Historians actually may method sila to get evidence and then weave it into a story. So it's not necessarily art daw ang history. So bakit nagkakaroon ng ganong pagkalito? Well, basically, tandaan natin na alam nyo, nakakatuwa kasi ang historians, akala natin writers. Pero wala sila sa National Artist wala sila sa award na order for National Artist. Except for people na nag-historical criticism. Kasi historical criticism, or sabihin na natin yung criticism of historical literature, ay nasa arts yun. So halimbawa, si Carlos Quirino, historical literature, si Rexil Mojares, National Artist for Historical Literature. Pero, kung ikaw ay historian, basically, inilalagay ka doon sa order of national scientists. At 3 lang yan. 3 lang ang historian sa National Scientist Award. No? Si Gregorio F. Zaide, Teodoro Agoncillo, at si Encarnacion Alzona. Yung Encarnacion Alzona, the first Ph.D. historian, first graduate of Ph.D. in the Philippines na babae. Okay? So, nakakatuwa, no? Pero Bakit may ganong pagkalito? Let's see. Ugatin natin ng konti before we call our guests, no? Ugatin natin ng konti yung ating kasaysayan kung paano nagkaroon ng social science. Okay? Now, according to the German social psychologist Erich Fromm, sa kanyang aklat na The Art of Loving, art is not the things that we create and put into museums. Yun yung implication ng kanyang mga sinulat. Akala natin pag sinabi mong art, yung mga spolyarium lang, o yung mga nilalagay sa mga museum. So basically, he said, the arts is the way we live. Ang paraan ng ating pamumuhay bilang mga tao. So he considered part of arts music, painting, carpentry, medicine, or engineering. That's why, kaya pala meron tayong naririnig minsan, School of Medical Arts. Diba? So art din pala yung engineering and medicine. And even loving. Paano naman kami mga walang love life? Anyway, so yan, forms of art daw yan. Even loving, ha? Anyway. So, if you're going to look at Erich Fromm's statement, that's how liberal arts was actually imagined before. Liberal arts is composed of both the arts and the sciences. Yun. The way we live. So ano yung makikita natin dito? Kaya pala sa iba't ibang school, iba-iba yung tawag. Bakit hindi isa, 'di ba, kapag sinabi mo College of Science, lahat ng university, College of Science. Pag College of Engineering, lahat ng university, engineering ang pangalan. Pero pagka nag-history ka, o nag-anthropology ka, o nagpo-political science ka, bakit iba-iba yung school? Merong College of Liberal Arts, yan, sa Lasal, yan ang tawag. May mga tinatawag tayong College of Social Sciences. Meron din tayong tinatawag na College of Arts and Sciences. Oh, kasi yun pala yun. Yung liberal arts, kasama pareho, arts and sciences. Oh? And si Professor Vanny Biernes reminded us that libera, no, yung pinagmulan ng salitang libera, liberal arts, libera, is born out of the Enlightenment. So, ibig sabihin, kung iisipin mo sina Rousseau, sina Voltaire, ito pala yung panahon na yon na yung liberal arts ay medyo yung naisip. Kasi, libera is to free us. To free. This is a study that frees humans. From what? From what? Kanino? Oh. Kasi nung panahon sa Europa, ang konteksto ng liberal arts sa pinagmulan niya ay yung panahon noon sa Europa, ano yan? Yan ay panahon ng mga kalakasan ng dalawang institusyon. Yung hari at yung simbahan. O, di ba? So, yung simbahan, meron siyang way of, ito yung kanyang pananaw sa mundo. May worldview siya. Yung hari, ganun din. Na actually, dikit sila ng simbahan sa yung hari kasi sino nagbibigay ng kapangyarihan sa hari? Ito yung simbahan. Diba? Kasi supposedly, ang hari ay galing sa Diyos at yung pamilya niya ay galing sa Diyos. So, ibig sabihin, kaugnay pala ang liberal arts ng tinatawag natin na pagpapalaya natin sa ating pagkatao nung panahon ng Enlightenment sa Europa. Bakit? Kasi 'di ba, ano ba yung panahon noon? May mga hierarchies. 'Di ba? May hari, 'di ba? Yung simbahan mataas, tapos yung mga mamamayan, tapos may mga alipin pa nga diyan eh. 'Di ba? So magkaiba yung antas ng hari, 'di ba? Mga dugong bughaw, tapos sila lang yung may mga karapatang mamuno. Pero ang enlightenment na sinasabi niya, kung kailangan magtanong tayo, gamitin natin ang isip natin, ang reason natin, ang rason natin. Di ba? Ngayon, kailangan napapatunayan ng siyensya at rason ang ating mga assumptions. So kung hindi natin ito mapatunayan, halimbawa, paano mo papatunayan na ang hari ay mas mataas kaysa sa ibang tao? Diba? Kung hindi mo yan mapatunayan, ibig sabihin, pantay-pantay ang tao. Man is equal. At doon na po nabuo yung mga konsepto natin ng equality. So, in the heart of the liberal arts, ay yung tinatawag natin na tinitingnan mo yung tao na yun ang sentro ng iyong pag-aaral, hindi ang Diyos, hindi ang hari, kundi ang tao, hindi ang pamahalaan, ang tao. And basically, di ba, gumagamit ka, pinapahalagan mo ang isip ng tao, ang siyensya na galing sa rason ng tao, di ba, para isolve ang mga problema ng bayan. Ganun po kasimple yun. So, basically, both the arts and sciences are considered to be the cornerstone of the attainment of man's full potential. Kasi dati, akala mo yung tao, subject lang yan, maliit lang yan, ang hari ang mahalaga, ang obispo ang mahalaga. Pero ang tao ay pwede palang mag-develop sa kanyang full potential. At yung soul niya is expressed in what we call the arts and humanities. Bakit? Para hindi ka nagke-create ng technical lang na tao. Yung tao marunong ngang skilled nga ng artisan. Pero yun pala, wala pala siyang puso. So binibigyan niya ng pagkatao ang tao. Yun ang role ng liberal arts. Para hindi maging robot ang tao na devoid ng kanyang humanity. This appreciation of the liberal arts is what gives us dignity, ladies and gentlemen. Interesting, di ba? So, yan po yung ating sinasabi. Kaya nga, di ba, yung College of Liberal Arts, Arts and Sciences sa UP, ngayon, College of Social Sciences and Philosophy sa UP, doon dumadaan lahat ng estudyante for the GE courses. Kasi kahit engineering ka, kahit scientist ka, that makes you a man. Not man. A human being. Kailangan gender sensitive po tayo mga kaibigan. A human being. Diba? So kung nag-aaral ka ng history, nag-aaral ka ng mga political theory, dadaan ka kahit na engineering ka, kahit na architecture ka, kahit na medicine ka. Sa tinatawag nating GE or General Education courses na usually ay sineserve ng mga tinatawag natin na liberal arts, arts and sciences, o yung tinatawag nating social science colleges. So yun pala yun. Mamaya, liliwanagin natin lahat yan. And eventually, the liberal arts program ay hinati. No? Nagkaroon ng liberal arts, nahati yung arts, nahati yung science, at nagkaroon pa ng pagkahati yung science and arts dun sa tinatawag nating social sciences. So yun ang basically sinasabi natin. So, ngayon, pag-aaralan natin, marami yung discipline sa social sciences. So, medyo iiwan na natin yung iba. Hindi na tayo magpo-focus doon. There were part ones of liberal arts, but meron ng arts, meron ng tinatawag na sciences, at meron ng social sciences. Siyempre, kasama sa social sciences na disiplina, yung disiplina namin, history, diba? Nandiyan yung sociology, nandiyan yung anthropology, political science, philosophy, psychology, at siyempre, minsan sinasama dyan yung economics. So, yun. Napaka-interesting po ng ating talakayan. Kaya, babatiin ko muna yung co-host natin ngayong araw na ito at may tanong ako sa kanya. Basically, ang co-host po natin ay nakilala ko lang po siya recently. Nakakatuwa, no? Nakakatuwa po siya. At batang-bata po, no? At siya po ay nagwagi ng Miss Teen Glam Philippines, no? At nung sumali po siya sa international contest representing our country, so nanalo siya sa Miss Teen Glam Philippines. Nanalo ulit siya doon sa tinatawag na Miss Teen Glam International 2020. So ano po ito? Ang kasama po natin ngayon, World Titleist po ito, no? World Titleist. At sana po, wag niyang iwan. Naalala ko sa kanya si Gemma Cruz Araneta. Di ba? Ang una nating beauty queen sa ibang bansa, Miss International 1964, na naging advocate ng kultura at heritage. No? So sana ganun din yung mangyari dito kasi apparently itong ating guest ay estudyante rin sa aking pamantasan at Nakilala ko lang siya recently, about 4 days ago. Pero ano no, sinusundan niyo yung TikTok ko. Mga kaibigan, may TikTok na ho ako, kaya ano niyo ako, subscribe po kayo sa TikTok ko, no. TikTok 'yun tungkol sa kasaysayan, lalo ng mga teacher. So, thank you talaga sa kanya, at siya po ay kasama natin ngayon. Siya po ay estudyante ng Behavioral Science Department ng College of Liberal Arts, De La Salle University. Binabati ko po si Binibining Mariel Prion. Mariel, kumusta ka?
Hello po. Magandang umaga.
Ay, kita mo may kasama pang sash yan, mga kaibigan. Maloka ka, di ba? So, you know, marami ng webinars na sinalihan si Mariel. She's talking about her advocacy, the environment. We're going to talk about that later, no, Mariel? But Mariel,
Sige
ang
po.
question ko sa inyo, bakit po kayo bakit po kayo nag-behavioral science sa kurso? Kasi, di ba, pwede namang business administration, pwede namang science, computer science, or whatever. Why did you take behavioral? Nasasabihin pa nila, di ba? Wala daw pera dyan sa social science, sa behavioral science. Ano trabaho mo? Paano ka kikita dyan? But why did you enter this course?
Kasi po nagmula po yan since my childhood po eh. Kasi mula po akong nasa age of 7 po or as early as 6, I was already very observant po sa aking surroundings. Imbis na laruan ang mga hinahanap ko o yung mga hilig ko, mahilig po akong magmasid ng mga tao. Ay halimbawa, kapag po kami pumupunta sa mga mall, hindi po ako tumitingin ng mga damit o kung ano pwedeng bilhin. Ang aking tinitingnan po ay paano kumilos ang mga tao sa aking paligid. I ask myself different questions po, like, bakit mas maraming tao ang bumibili sa Forever 21 compared sa Pen Shop, which is a local store? Bakit mas maraming tao ang kumakain sa mga fast food? Bakit po ba sila mas inclined sa mga Western brands? Ano po yung mga dahilan nun? Kasi po, napapansin ko nung bata ako, mas maraming tao nga po talaga ang pumapasok sa mga ganong store. So, napapaisip ako, bakit? Ano yung mga dahilan nun? At halimbawa rin po yung kultura, sa Mega Mall po, napapansin ko, bakit tuwing buwan ng wika lang, maraming taong pupunta doon? Samantalang buong taon, kakaunti lang, di ba? So, mga ganong tanong po talaga naisip ko. At sabi sa akin ng tatay ko, ay grabe itong anak ko, iba siya mag-isip.
Oo. So nakita mo na agad, no, madam, yung pagkakahati sa ating lipunan, yung dambuhalang pagkakahating pangkalinangan, di ba? May bumibili sa ganitong klaseng tindahan, may bumibili sa ganitong klaseng mall. So that's why. Nakumuha ka ba ng HUMSS mismo nung ikaw ay senior high school?
Yes po, HUMSS po ako.
So, pero you told me na hindi ka pa kumukuha ng major subjects. Sabi mo, sir, nahihiya ako, hindi ko pa alam, hindi pa ako masyadong maalam kasi wala pa akong major subjects. Pero you know,
wala pa lang kami.
Pero I really want you to join us later para actually makasama natin. Titan po yung kasama natin ngayon. So, Mariel, mamaya you will help me with the questions later. Sige and po. You will also speak your mind about your advocacies, no, and how behavioral science can help in that kind of advocacy that you have, which is the environment. Okay, thank you, Mariel.
Salamat
so ngayon po, ang gagawin natin ay tatawagin na po natin yung ating guest, yung ating mga subject matter expert, no, SME na tinatawag natin. Alam nyo, ito pong ating susunod na guest. Ito po ating subject matter expert. Ito po ay hindi ko na mabilang, hindi ko chinek. Pero I know na maraming subjects akong kinuha sa aking Doctorate of Anthropology course dito sa Araling ito. And she is one of the most recognized social scientists in our country, no? Based in Ateneo de Manila, but she is also teaching in the University of the Philippines. And siya po ay professor of Sociology and Anthropology in Ateneo de Manila. And she was also one of those who established with Father Frank Lynch 60 years ago 60 years ago, the Institute of Philippine Culture. My teacher, hopefully she considers me her good student. My mentor, Dr. Mary Racelis. Dr. Racelis, magandang umaga po sa inyo. Makasaysayang umaga.
Hi. Magandang umaga naman sa iyo, Xiao, and all our friends online, as well as on this session. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you po. It's such an honor. Parang nag-iisip ako noon na how would I be able to be with Ma'am Racelis again in this time of lockdown. And I was able to, dumating yung show na to. And then I said, let's book one of these days si Ma'am Mary. No? And ito, papakita ko sa inyo, her first book is The Dynamics of Power in a Philippine Municipality, which apparently I was able to buy recently in Facebook groups. So, ang pangalan po niya dito, Mary Hollensteiner. That's her married name. So kapag may nakita kayo, at maraming works yan, maraming journal articles yan, Mary R. Hollensteiner, siya din po yun. Ewan ko kung kwento niya mamaya. Anyway, thank you, Ma'am Mary, for coming. And hopefully, kasi, anthropologists and sociologists, when they study, tinatago nila yung mga pangalan ng mga lugar at mga tao na they're studying. And ito, Barrio Hulo, o Bayan ng Hulo. Siguro, ma'am, pagdating ng panahon, mamaya, you will tell me in secret, saan yung Bayan ng Hulo.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. We will go back to you, madam. That our next guest is, she was a student of De La Salle University, Philippine Studies, if I'm not mistaken. And our guest, ladies and gentlemen, when she was a student, she interviewed me. I was already in La Salle at that time. Ngayon po, ay Ph.D. na po siya. She's already a doctor of philosophy, and she is now professor of social science or teaching social sciences in the Visayas State University. I would like to welcome Miss Leslie Ann Liwanag, or si Lian. Lian, hi.
Hi, hello. Good morning.
Good morning, Lian. Thank you for coming. And also, nakakatuwa kasi si Lian po, we wrote Skype po siya. Ako, teacher na nun. She was a student at that time. We wrote a paper together recently, which was published in Plaridel, which is a Scopus, pag Scopuso, alam ng mga professors, teachers yan, malaking bagay yan. So, she's the only one who was the reason why I got published in a Scopus. We worked on a paper on Isabelo de los Reyes and La Solidaridad. So, Lian, thank you. And later, we will be having a discussion. Salamat, Lian. We go to Ma'am Mary. Ma'am Mary, my question is, we will focus on your fields, which is you were first a sociologist and then an anthropologist. Can we, kasi ako, minsan nalilito din ako. Because these disciplines, my minor pala or cognate in my undergrad was sociology. And then I started, kasi history ako, BA history. When I was in MA history, my cognate became anthropology. But even sometimes, I cannot distinguish the difference kasi ang parehong pinag-aaralan ay lipunan. The society. So what's the difference, ma'am? Or what's the definition and then the difference between sociology and anthropology?
Well, you're right. They overlap for sure. But at the same time, I think, they're more, it's more of a tendency. And sociology tends to look at society as a whole, how it functions, and of course at different groups in society. But it comes at the society in a sense from the big to the small. Anthropology tends to start with the small, and before that's all they used to do, in the early days, 100 years ago, indigenous people, small communities, self-contained yung pag ganon. But over the years, of course, it became clear that they are part of a much larger society and affected by the society. So anthropologists began going beyond their small communities to look at the outside world, which affects those communities and how those communities also affect the outside world. So one difference is where they start from as a priority.
Yeah, I remember when I was taking up sociology as a cognate, one of the first readings that people will let me read, or my teachers will let me read, would be C. Wright Mills' The Sociological Imagination.
Yeah.
Diba? Wherein C. Wright Mills identified that you should look at society. There are two levels of study. Diba? You have history, kaya nga nadama yung discipline ko doon. History, which is the big picture, and biography. Diba? Biography, which is yung individual lives of people. Now, when you have a sociological imagination, supposedly you will see the connectedness of the two, or the connections of the two. Can we expound on this in the realm of sociology, madam? Itong connection of history and biography.
History and biography. Oh, that's another field, no, for me anyway.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about sociology and how it connects with sociology and anthropology, I think that anthropologists have in the past, at least, I think even today, are much more connected with the people whom they quote unquote study. No, of course now we don't talk about it like that. It's not. We're trying to move away from that. Coming from outside, somebody who doesn't know that comes in, studies them, writes it up, leaves, writes it up in a journal or a book. Parang wala na yan. At least it's hindi na uso yun.
Right.
Philosophically, in the discipline, I think many of us feel now, and a lot of sociologists also have moved in that direction. No? Now, if you're studying a problem in society involves a certain group of people, they should be your co-knowledge generation. It's a big term. Knowledge generation is really co-produced, and yung knowledge ay nasa kanila. So
right.
They have the right to decide what should be, how should that be explained, what their experiences are. And so it's seen as a partnership. So now we talk about knowledge management or knowledge generation as co-production, co-dissemination. In other words, we can't just take the data or what we learned and go away and tapos na yon, no? No, they are part of the process, and especially, usually they have many issues. I mean, you always study people who have certain problems as you define.
Right.
And they have problems, but then you begin to see how do they define it. Iba naman their perspective may be very different of what is the problem versus yours. But whatever, dapat naman yung data should be part of their knowledge generation so they can address the problems they're facing.
Right.
And it's a kind of a co-creativity thing. You build everybody's capacities. It's not just they and us, but it's now much more together us in knowledge generation, because we learn from one another. It's not one way.
This is what I learned from you, Ma'am Mary, because when I was studying, diba, there's well, of course, I did not say that this was my view, but there's a very widespread view of how social scientists do their study. For example, that I come as a researcher to a group of people, and then, di ba, ang tawag dati is subjects, di ba, which is in many ways a derogatory term, apparently. Because, di ba, parang yung king and the subjects, meaning they're like really lower life forms which you're studying because they're weird people, and you will write their weirdness, your perspective reigns, you're like, they're weird in my opinion. They're, shall we say, di ba, meron pa tinatawag dati na ano nga ba yun? Yung parang exoticism, di ba? Sometimes, so these are poor people, these are the farmers, and I'm not a farmer. In my perspective, this is what they're doing, and then we write about it, and that's it. Di ba? Parang and even in the way, this is also reflected in how well-meaning groups, which of course we now call NGOs, who are supposedly helping these people. Parang, we come here, we to help you, we know the solutions to your problems because we came from the West, we are educated in Western tradition, and we are giving this dole out to you. Di ba parang ganon? And then parang you look at these people as people you have to help, quote unquote. Now, I learned from you, ma'am, and this is like I owe you this, that you should treat people whom you get knowledge from as culture bearers.
Yes.
Diba? They are, even if they did not have the education that I have, the education that they have, I do not have it. And when you study a community, diba, you get their perspective. So, Ma'am Mary, we're talking about the study I'm doing now, which hopefully will finish soon, about the Nazareno and the devotees. Basically, the example is, I'm not imposing my beliefs about their beliefs. I should listen to their beliefs and represent them well. And then after that, you're saying very important, is to bring back this research to them.
Yeah,
right.
tama
Wow.
yun. That's very much the case now. No?
Mm-hmm. Now, my next question would be, kasi we're done with sociology. In anthropology, there's always this general, shall we say, definition of anthropology as the study of culture, which is actually contested and very vague. like you don't just, because people, it's very simplistic, like history is the study of the past and anthropology is the study of culture or cultures, which is contested and all, and we will not dwell on that. But what I'm seeing here is that I think there's a change also in the way anthropology was done. Because when people talk about anthropology, they're thinking of Margaret Mead, they're thinking of Mary Douglas, who go to quote-unquote exotic lands that are different from the Western groups of people. So basically, they're always sometimes Asian or African, right? That's the thing. Or if we're talking about the Philippines, when we talk about anthropology, laging parang tribu. Diba? I mean, what you call quote-unquote tribu. Na but now, I think there was a pioneering thing that you did with the Ateneo professor and Jesuit priest Father Frank Lynch, called you co-established 60 years ago the Institute of Philippine Culture. Tell us about this. How did this change the perspective of people about anthropology? And I think you can also talk about, since you're part of it, what you think was the impact of this change of perspective in anthropology.
Well, Father Frank Lynch, who had just come back in 1959 to the Philippines with a Ph.D. in anthro from University of Chicago, decided he had to establish a research institute at Ateneo. He had done his dissertation research in Bicol, so he was very knowledgeable about the Philippines. And anyway, so when he came back, he said, anthropologists traditionally have been associated with indigenous groups.
Right.
That's not to say they're not important. Of course they're important. But in the Philippines, even in Spanish times, you could say there were people, missionaries especially, who studied these, what you said, exotic peoples. And then when the Americans came, they also were fascinated with indigenous people because there's something so different. So many of them who then, as anthropologists came in, that became the field because it was worldwide like that.
Right.
And the Department of Anthro at UP was started, I think, 1912, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Anyway, 12. But it was H. Otley Beyer who started, but it was archaeology, physical anthropology, and it was really not cultural, except that he would get his students to write, when they went home on vacation, Christmas, to write about their society. So parang may cultural din, but it was never really emphasized, no?
Yes.
And so the result was, by the time 1960, when Father Lynch came, he said, this the country is involved in the struggle about who is a Filipino, right?
Right.
And what are the basic values of society, of this society? And so we can't talk only about the 10% or whatever it was, 5%, 10% of indigenous people. We have to talk about the 85%, what he called the lowland Christian Filipino. Not so much that they were Christian, even though what it was is they're not indigenous people anymore, even though they trace themselves to that heritage hundreds of years ago. So he said, we need to look at the majority population because very little research had been done about that population, certainly by anthropologists. A few sociologists had already started, Filipino sociologist Agaton Pal in the Visayas, actually. Maybe Leslie knows that, no? A little bit later, Helia Castillo came back with a Ph.D. And so gradually, sociologists were doing what they called rural sociology, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we began to, with Father Lynch, to look at the barrio at that time, barangay communities, from an anthropological perspective, which is really mainly that you live there, you do participant observation, you're part of the culture. It was like we were initially encroaching on, quote, their territory as sociologists, rural sociologists. So what was the difference? And I guess the difference is, how you approach it. And that sociologists tend to be more quantitative than anthropologists. Anthropologists favor much more a qualitative, although more recently, because they're into the large-scale society also, globalization and what does it mean to people, they've also gotten quantitative, but that's one big difference, I think, even now between the two, that you study people and you have to generalize for sociology on a larger basis from survey research, ideally. Right. Anthropology starts with small groups, cuento, and you draw from that. How do people think about their lives?
Wow. It became clearer while you're explaining to me now the difference between sociology and anthropology in the focus, but also the important thing that you told us is that Philippine anthropologists are not anymore inclined to just study groups of people that are, supposedly indigenous, but even subcultures within urban areas, all of these things. For example, when I said I'm studying PhD in anthropology, would you field work in mountain province? People were asking me. I said, no, I just have to go to Quiapo for some time during the procession time, the fiesta time, for about, I've been doing it for the past 6 years. So that's how I did it. And you're saying that you actually, in many ways, a participant observer. You do participant observation, right? You live with them, diba? You make friends with them actually. But of course, there are some ethical issues. We will not talk about that because it would be another issue. But basically, what I would like to point out as a segue to the next question would be how the lens, because it is important, the lens of the social sciences, the lens of anthropology, I mean, helps us clarify important issues in our society. Now, for example, you've been involved in the debates during that time in the passage of what we call the reproductive health bill. How do you think your perspectives in sociology and anthropology helped you in making a stand and articulating, diba, the issue of maternal and child health, and and then of course we all know, and we have to be sensitive about this as well, about what the churches stand on it, which is against a lot of people's stand about the reproductive health here. How did the discipline inform your position on that?
Well, that's a lovely story to tell, because when the bill had been languishing, of course, in Congress year after year, but then when the NGOs, largely who are involved in reproductive health with women's groups, were fighting it again, and the official church, some official church people, bishops, priests, were railing against it, and making big statements about why contraception, what they were concerned about was artificial, so-called artificial contraception, that's wrong, basically evil. And so some of us at the Ateneo, we were talking about that, and I think I said, why don't we get together and really examine what is this issue here? So about 14 of us came together and just began talking about why is this position so difficult for us as social scientists. We were there were a couple of the philosophers, theologians, no, I don't think we had theology. Anyway, why is that so difficult for us to accept? Because the evidence on the ground shows that there's a whole series of issues that the official position of the church was refusing to recognize or give importance to, even though they knew it. And that was the situation of women, especially poor women, right?
Right.
So we had already done with my colleague, Mariel Castro Guevara, we had done sociological and anthropological studies in various urban poor communities. And we knew, and her study showed in, I think, in a couple of communities, that when poverty is different levels, not everybody, maybe 80% are really below the poverty line. There are some who are better off, but there are gradations. And the bottom 10% among the poor, already poor, but the poorest of the poor, as they said, isang kahi, isang tuka, were women who had large numbers of children and usually with no spouse. That was a sociological finding.
Wow.
And we said, they have 7, 8, 9 children. The husband leaves, or if there was never a husband, anyway, they have all these children and they can't cope with it. And so many of them, either they have different strategies. Inaampon, they say to the sister or an auntie, sa inyo na lang siya. And others are on the street. They would tell us, yung mga dalawang anak ko ng lalaki, nasa kali na sila. I just pray to God that he will take care of them, because I can't do it. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. I have to focus on them, and then the older ones also have to take care. So all of that, and the sicknesses, and so the dilemmas of women in that category, and then upward also. And they had no access, or at least they didn't know they could get access to all forms of family planning. We were not saying
right.
You have to do contraception,
yes.
but all forces, right? And the church said certain ones are okay, natural family planning, fine, but let them know that, and that they have a right to it. And I think our contribution as Ateneo, because we are Ateneo Jesuit Catholic School, we wrote a statement, first 16 pages, and then nobody wanted to read it, it was too long, and we condensed it to about 6, which for government, which was, we reviewed, and it was really Mariel Guevara who did most of that research, while we were talking about how you do this. She went through the encyclicals of the Catholic Church to show what the values are that really support our side, that you have to enable women or families, not just women, but the families, to have the right to decide on their own and gain access. And the number one issue was, as we pulled out from encyclicals, the notion of conscience. And that's very clear in Catholic theology, that it's your conscience in the end that decide. So we said, if these women have access to the knowledge, and they discuss it, of course, among themselves or think about it, if they decide, then not only is it their right to decide what they want to do, and if they decide they want to use so-called artificial or contraceptions, then and it's made in a good faith and decision, then that should be all right. That fits with the church statement. And there were some priests, Jesuits, friends of ours, who basically agreed.
Right.
They couldn't identify themselves because, of course, they would be, chastised. So it was we were all lay people. We said do not involve the official church people because they're going to be clobbered if they take our point of view.
Right.
And you have to look at the situation of women. And last thing I want to say there is because many of them have not had access to really decent forms, modern forms of family planning, which includes contraception, then they go for an abortion, and that is illegal.
Yeah, that is even worse.
We have deaths, 12 deaths, 12 women's deaths per day in the Philippines. At least 1/4 of it came from illegal abortions because they were using abortion as their family planning method.
Oh my goodness.
That? So we said, what's the greater sin? I once said to my Jesuit friend, who I said, if you fight this, you are actually leading to the murder. You're calling it murder. You're leading to the killing of infants because you don't give women the chance to prevent a pregnancy. So that was our deal. If you look at the women who are poor, the rich people, they wanted, both of them, the same number of children at the beginning, 2, mainly 3. And the rich people, women, got that. They have 2 or 3, but the poor ones have 6, 7, and 8. So the society is not accountable to the poor, and we're trying to make it accountable through this RH bill. And if you care about women's rights and lives, and the children, the women themselves will say, please, God, forgive me for having this abortion, for going to the hilot or some quack doctor supposedly, because I have 6 other children that I have to take care of. I cannot have another one. So just forgive me, God, you understand, right? And that's how they operate.
Actually, I was your student during the middle of all of that, and what was charming or fantastic about what I was learning from you at that time was I was also reading your public pieces, your op-eds in the Philippine Daily Inquirer, which is very important for me because the studies are often not communicated to the public. Sometimes it's just but for an issue as important as the reproductive health bill, it has to go out. And so you did a great service because the thing was in that issue, those who are talking in the media, in the public sphere, were the men, the politicians. They're not what you're saying, the stakeholders, and we call them the stakeholders of this issue, which were the poor Catholic urban women who have the most children who needed this, and their voices, their experiences are not being heard. So parang, when Gayatri Spivak, for example, was was asking about can the subaltern speak, and her answer was no. This was like the real thing. The people themselves, the women, cannot speak, and it's really you who have to bring their voices out. And that was I think the most charming part of anthropology or the social sciences that I saw in that issue. Based on what you did, you actually did public social science, public anthropology, and this has a real impact in the lives of the people. The other thing that I want to ask you about before we go to
before
next,
you go on,
please.
I think I have to give much more credit to those NGOs working with urban poor women, NGOs and actually a couple of political parties, because they were the ones who, I remember saying, if you cannot get women into Congress to lobby, poor women, the congressmen see that poor women want this, they keep accusing us of just you middle-class people, you have these ideas, but that's not really how it is. So to the credit of those NGOs who, Likhaan in particular, but many others, who work with women on the ground and where this was an issue, they were the ones who, well, let me say, for them, it was important that we wrote this statement that we sent to Congress for the lobbying, which is you can be Catholic and vote for the RH bill. And when we gave the rationale from the Catholic sector itself, through the encyclicals, etc., these middle-class people who are trying to work with the urban poor or rural poor felt now they have a basis for saying to government, whoever, that this is not acceptable. The Catholic churches are going to, and the parish priest is going to have lots of problems. Just show them this. Tell them, quote encyclicals, quote the primacy of conscience to them. So for this middle level, it was very important to be able to have that argument from the Catholic sector that it was all right to go for family planning. At that time, we stayed out of abortion because, we didn't, except we were saying women go into abortion because they don't have access to family.
Okay, I'll ask you about the urban poor later because it can be injected in some of the issues that maybe Leslie is going to talk about. Thank you, ma'am. I'll go back to you later. Lian, my question would be, since you're actually came from the Departamento ng Filipino in Lasal, Philippine Studies, paano ka nag-transition? Kasi you are a Phil Stud major, you're a graduate of Philippine Studies, you work in the University Research Office of our university, diba? And then you went to the University of Visayas State University. In what campus nga? Tacloban ba?
Baybay City. So
Baybay
marami kaming
City.
campus. Itong Baybay City ay nasa gitna ng Tacloban at Mormok.
Yeah, yan. So what was the how did you transition to that? Ano yung journey mo to transition from being a Philippine Studies major to social science teacher? Was it very difficult? Was it masyado bang malaki yung talon?
Malaking talon. Kung may mas malaki pa sa talon, ano ba? Actually, sige, let me start with this. Philippine Studies, okay. We use concepts, we use frameworks, from different disciplines in order to study about the language, culture, and media of our country. So my approach is basically, masasabi ko, interdisciplinary among social science, philosophy, linguistics, history. That's why I collaborate with you and with others now in the philosophy. So bagatin na natin yung research training sa DLSU that masters pa lang nakikipag-collaborate na with senior faculty members, with OVCRI. My output is that I need to publish and all that. So my context is yung paglipat ko from Lasal, from undergrad to PhD, na talagang leader dun sa research institution ngayon. Lahat ng disiplina ay walang diskriminasyon at lahat ng proyekto ay sinusuportahan. I remember how I challenged our VCRI, Dr. Raymond Tan, and to accept me as one of his doctoral apprentice, na usually sciences yung tinatanggap. Sa pagsusumikap ni Roderick Nuncio na magkakaroon ng way para magkaroon din ng ganong oportunidad yung mga nasa College of Liberal Arts. So Philippine Studies is under Filipino Department na wala pang center.
Right.
Okay. So I told them that I can deliver an output-based, siguro publication maging output ko for DLSU. And yung paglipat ko sa Visayas State University, which is a Visayan Agricultural University, siguro masasabi natin na hindi pag-aanong nare-realize yung halaga ng social sciences and humanities sa research. Kasi talagang hard sciences to, Sir Xiao.
All right. Before you go to that point, I would like to emphasize lang what you were saying and what Ma'am Mary demonstrated earlier, that despite the fact that there are disciplinal divisions between the social sciences, it is actually now encouraged, hindi pinahihintulutan ng term ini-encourage, na ang mga tao ay multidisciplinary approach. Ibig sabihin, for example, I'm a historian, hindi lang ako history. Actually, talaga kahit bago pa ako mag-PhD anthropology, nag-anthropology na talaga ako.
Exactly.
So, kaya nga, kapag ka ikaw ay nasa College of Social Sciences and Philosophy sa UP, lagi may cognate course na history, and then either mag-polsci ka, may kukunin kang kurso sa polsci, and all of that. But in Lasal, what's happening is not just, sabihin na nating interdisciplinary, pero may multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. Pa, ibig sabihin, there's a, shall we say, ang faculty mismo at mga researchers are actually collaborating even if they come from different disciplines. So, kasi di ba, pagka multidisciplinary ka, ikaw isang tao, nagmarami kang discipline na tinitignan. Pero, sa Lasal, tao ng mga iba-ibang disiplina nagsasama-sama, which is actually more, in many ways, very powerful and very effective. Correct. Now, you're going now to, shall we say, a school na hindi talaga social science. Agricultural school, so it's a science school. We will be teaching social science. So how are you doing it? How are you doing it? How do you make it? How do you make the students feel that social science is too serious to be left to social scientists?
Exactly. So alam na natin na sciences, they explore the workings of the natural world, di ba? Actually. And that's called the hard sciences. So may chemistry, may physics. I have students who came from mechanical engineering, agriculture, forestry, and all that. So parang ang gusto ko lang approach na sinasabi ko sa kanila sa konteksto ay yung tanong na who am I? Sino ako sa mundo na ito? Ano ang responsibilidad ko bilang tao bukod sa paggawa ng machines, bukod sa pag-create ng mga produkto ng hard sciences na sinasabi natin, hindi lang ito monopolyo ng natural sciences. So maaari itong sagutin ng iba't ibang disiplina katulad ng anthropology, katulad ng psychology, tulad ng sociology, and even the digital world, di ba? Meron ng bagong mga perspektibo tungkol doon. So parang yon, yung soft sciences, we deal with the intangible things that relate to the study of human beings and behaviors, interactions, thoughts, and feelings na pinapahalagahan natin yung isip ng pagiging tao, na ang tao ay hindi lang the physical aspect of it, but meron din siyang kaluluwa. Diba? Which is very universal. May it be hard sciences or, may it be in different fields in the soft sciences. So parang makakatulong ito para makaresolve ng mga problema sa society natin na binibigyan ng pagkatao yung tao.
So yun. Parang akala mo pala yung ano bang role ko? Ano bang role ko sa mundong ito? Hindi lang pala siya Miss Universe question. Diba? Diba? So that's pwede ka pala na it's really a question na ang gandang tanungin from the start when you're talking to people who are not social scientists. Kasi syempre, pagka nag-liberal arts ka, matik yun eh.
Yeah.
Diba? Pero yun na nga, so that we will not turn, kasi ito nga yung nagiging problema eh. Ito, let's call a spade, and I'm going to be very frank about this. The emphasis of the educational system today, na ang major courses lang ay math, science, and English, is I think one of the reasons why. Diba? Number one, parang walang sorry pero this is a very general statement that might not be supported, pero I'm just, inferring in many ways. Bakit may mga bata ngayon na parang kahit na ang tali-talino nila, marunong sila sa teknolohiya, marunong mag-edit, mag-TikTok, di ba? But, bastos silang sumagot sa Facebook. Di ba? Wala silang respeto. Di ba? So parang itong social sciences, what you're saying, at yung Araling Panlipunan, di ba? Yung nag-aaral, yung nag-aaral ng ating lipunan, yung mga subject na nag-aaral ng ating lipunan, ay actually way para ituro, at tama ka doon, pagpapakatao. Yung social sciences, pag nilagay mo yan sa Araling Panlipunan, gives the what you call the humanity sa isang tao. Nagiging tao ang tao. Why? Because if you have the anthropological lens, makikinig ka muna. 'Di ba? We issue. Anong opinion ni Leslie tungkol dito? Hindi ko siya awayin agad na ano ka naman eh, ganyan ka naman, ano ka eh. Di ba? Kasi bobo ka. Ganyan agad, di ba? So, kaya nagkakaroon ng ganong tendency ang mga tao ngayon. Hindi lang ito sa Pilipinas. Hindi ko sinasabing sa Pilipinas lang ito. In the whole world, is that nauuna pa yung paniniwala natin at ini-impose natin ito sa iba.
Correct.
Di ba? Well, in fact, the social sciences and supposedly the social studies should teach us how to be humans and how to listen.
Correct.
To other people.
Because most of the time, like in the recent world ngayon, we actually listen to reply. We don't actually listen to actually know the situation of the person. Nakikinggan natin dahil gusto nating mag-reply, gusto nating impose yung gusto nating sabihin. So the social sciences, tinutulungan natin maunawaan kung paano makikipag-ugnayan actually in the social. Na hindi ang tao ang mag-isa sa mundo. So yun lang, yun ang pinaka-ano doon. So recently, parang may struggle no, from SU to VSU na bumubuo pa lang ako ng mga groups or research collaborators kung saan may layunin kaming palakasin yung social sciences and humanities. And most of them are their faculties actually. And kasi before, kung matatandaan, sa konteksto ng Leyte talaga, hindi pa ganoon kalakas yung research sa social sciences at dahil namatay yung Divine University or the DIVU, which is before, yes, na leader talaga siya sa research sa social sciences because of the latest summer studies. But ngayon, tinuturing na sister school actually ng University of San Carlos. So ngayon, mas nag-focus kami doon sa Leyte summer studies, Sir Xiao. Okay? So parang nagkakaroon kami ng mga projects that would focus more on the people in summer Leyte. So for example, we have the Stereotypes Project, which talks about, tinitignan namin yung mga karaniwang stereotypes ng mga waray Cebuano.
Yung mga waray daw, matapang, yung mga gano'n.
Yes, something like that. And which, interestingly, I'm not a part of. No? But
hindi ka naman taga Visayas eh.
Yes, exactly.
Taga Baguio ka ba?
Hindi.
Saan nanggaling yun?
Pareho ako. Actually pareho kami ni Ma'am Mary Racelis na taga Antipolo, but she's another part of Antipolo. Antipolo is very big. Nagkaroon lang talaga ng opportunity to teach here in the Visayas region, which for me is very interesting and very challenging at the same time. So doon, gumagawa kami, yung research group namin, gumagawa kami ng projects that would deal about the people of Leyte. That would deal about the cultural heritage of Leyte. So we had recently launched a book, NCCA book, cataloging and baselining of cultural heritage, which is a part of arts also, na isa ring namamarginalize ng mga disiplina. So yun yung pinaka-ano namin ngayon, yung efforts namin.
So, napakahalaga, no? Magsisegue ako kay Ma'am Mary, pero napakahalaga na yung sinasabi mo na you highlight also anthropology, sociology, the social sciences, highlight not just the national perspective, pero kasi when you begin, for example, anthropologically from small groups, you now highlight local. And that means na mas nakaka-relate, nagkakaroon ng saysay, kung kasaysayan naman yan, nagkakaroon ng saysay sa tao yung pag-aaral. Now, going back to Ma'am Mary, my question would be, people always look at the urban poor and the poor in the country na parang there are a lot of assumptions. There are a lot of assumptions like, sila ay may hirap kasi tamad sila, ganon. May mga assumption na kaya sila mahirap kasi yung mga Pilipino ay mahilig sa mga dole-outs and all of this, na parang nakakababa sa tingin ng mahirap. How does the social sciences dignify and in a way try to solve the problems of poverty in the Philippines? And you've worked with a lot of organizations, and of course I'm very familiar with your involvement with the Urban Poor Associates, at na-involve nga ako dyan because I trained the POs, the People's Organizations Leaders History. Pero kayo ma'am, how does social sciences help in making people understand the situation of the poor in this country?
Well, I think one way is first, we rely on evidence. That's really our strength.
Yes.
So the NGOs who work with the urban poor, are doing community organizing and, in everyday life. And they, of course, will get data also for their programs, but not systematically because they're focusing on action. And
Right.
when a social scientist comes there, and our view is, what's the evidence that will help you? Because you start with a preference, you might say bias, to say, how can they frame the problem from their perspective, which is recognized as logical by those who are in power, no? So one is, what's the evidence available so that you can bring two ways, help them use the evidence that they define as necessary for them if they're organized, they have some clear picture of where to go. How does the evidence help them? But also, how does the evidence restructure our understanding of the urban poor and change the paradigm?
Wow.
Right? Now, what does that mean, change the paradigm? The point you were making, now the assumption that they're, helpless or lazy, they don't work, and they're taking land which is not theirs. We said, look at the realities of 1/3 of the population of Metro Manila today are informal settlers.
Wow.
If that's the case, and there are many more who are still poor above that, who are, renting apartments, so sort of legitimately.
Right.
1/3 are still in the poor category. Why? Because they moved to rural areas, sometimes 60 years ago, all the way through. But what has to be changed? What does the evidence show about them? And I tried to bring that out when you say, first of all, now in the older slum communities, they're not migrants anymore. There are still the first generation migrants, who are now 60 years old, 70 years old because they came long ago. But yung mga anak nila and their mga apo were all born in Manila. So maybe the parents, yung middle generation, still recognizes may probinsya sila. But the younger ones na, parang, my parents came from Bicol or wherever, pero they don't identify with that. Urban na sila. They watch TV and they can see that they're in the lower part of the society by social regard na, bakit ganon? So questioning that and then making their statements. That's why evidence is important for them. But this whole notion of, I once identified, what are the false paradigms? One is that they're migrants, and mostly they're not anymore, although they're still those, because the city always attracts. That without them, that they are the bulk of the workforce of the city. If all of them went on strike tonight, the city would collapse, right?
Yes.
So when they stopped just the jeepney drivers alone, tricycle drivers, the city was paralyzed, right? Because nobody could get to work.
So send them home, and the city would be in ruins.
Yeah. So recognize that there are your major urban labor force,
Mm-hmm.
and then third, that they're not all uniformly, very poor. That there are ranges and different levels of people who you define as poor, define themselves in other ways as tricycle drivers, the women as vendors, and so on. I think another one we discovered was when you organize rural communities or when you work and see who is doing the work every day, struggling, it's the women. And when there's organizations, it's usually the women who become the leaders. Why?
Wow.
Because they're there. As tinanong ko nga once, bakit naman sa mga urban poor communities, almost all daw pala are women? They said, well, kasi nandito kami, we're always here. And, we have to worry about how am I going to feed my child tonight, at least 3 beses ang araw. That's their definition of their definition. Makakain ng 3 beses ang araw consistently, then you're out of poverty. That's their line, no? And so then, but they added, because now that they're organized, they have learned how to make demands of government.
Wow.
No? And sabi ng yung isa, you have to know how to negotiate with this gobyerno. You have to know how to psychologize them. And yun ang talent ng mga babae, hindi ba?
Wow!
And she said, halimbawa, if I give my husband 20 pesos to buy something sa palengke, and the tindera says, oh, magkano to? 20 pesos. Yan, lalabas agad yung 20 pesos. Pag ako, aba, I'll say, ano yan? Ang mahal naman. And then I will start bargaining and then I get it cheaper, mga 14 or 15. She said, women know how to do that. So ngayon, now that we're always negotiating with government na mga demands namin, you know, we're in a better position because we know, well, okay, back up muna because he's already naiinis na siya, you know, so you have to find another way. And women have done that all their lives. How you manage in society is you have to be very flexible and you have to know how to read people. And then the third, and that's the final one, sabi niya, you know, when some of these officials, they talk to you like you're nobody, you know, but we've learned how to speak back. But if a man who is a leader speaks back like that, you know, retorts, ayan, away na sila, you know, and then...
Walang nawapala.
So whereas women don't away, you know, they don't go into the kind of almost fisticuffs. So with the, you know, if you're in that situation, iba na yan if it's a revolution, no? But that's where the men usually are. But women know how to manage people and situations, and of course they have the bottom line is they have to feed their kids tonight. So those are the kinds of evidence to say this is what, like, you know, urban poor communities are. And finally, from all of that, the fourth paradigm is they have a right to the city. They're Filipino citizens. They have a right to be there. They are contributing through it's the informal economy, so it's not sort of not recognized by the economists. But now economists are beginning to take that informal economy as part of, you know, the valid part of society and justifying it as that they have rights and that they need to be provided services in order to improve their lives.
What you emphasize very well, Madam, is the role of social science to actually not just, you know, makukuha ka ng information sa kanila, and then you get away, but also, you know, kasi when you study these groups, it's natural that you bring them together, di ba?
Yeah.
So in a way, when you bring them together and then you inform them, it empowers them na mahalaga pala sila. Diba? So that's why, you know, the power to giving power to the stakeholders. So it's the role of the social scientist, not just as to dignify a human being, but also to empower them. Ito'y napakahalagang concept.
Through evidence, that the difference, because see, the NGOs do that, no, and they do it well. But our contribution is to provide the evidence so that you can show that, like, you know, when you say change the framework, you know, we do that because we study society.
Right.
And when we, for the first time, you say to big shot people, you know, the urban poor are they're the solution. They're not. You always think they're problems. They are the solution to how the city can operate, but only they don't have access to decent housing, decent sanitation, jobs,
education,
and that is the role of government to help them because they're very striving people. You know, they work almost 24/7. Everybody in the family in order to survive. No, so change the paradigm.
Fantastic.
From their point of view.
I know our teachers learned a lot from this conversation. Now I would go to Mariel, because her heart is really her advocacy for the environment. Now, listening to Leslie, Filipino ako, nakinig ka kay Leslie, nakinig ka kay Ma'am Mary. Mariel, ano sa palagay mo ngayon yung magiging parang tulong ng behavioral science na kurso mo doon sa pag-develop ng iyong advocacy at ng way of communicating this advocacy sa ating environment? Tingin mo?
That's actually the reason why I joined different organizations and why I studied behavioral sciences is because I want to know how to further to reach out to people. Because when I was a kid, I thought being an environmentalist is all about just the environment, the earth. But as I grow up, I realized that it's also about the people, how we connect with them and actually empower them to do action. And a year ago or 2 years ago, I was able to attend a talk from a guest speaker who is also an environmentalist. And he said there are 4 steps for you to make change to people, for you to inspire them to do action for your advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
Step 1, educate, inspire, empower, and act. So step 1 is very important because if you want the people to do something about a certain situation, they must first know what it is about. You cannot force a person to
Tama.
sign a petition. You cannot force them to attend a cleanup event if they don't know what it is about, what is the purpose of it. And that's how I see social sciences as a way for you to make change, to reach out to people. And it really helped me as an environmentalist because I now see it that it is more than just about the earth, it's also about the people. And actually, my professor in sociology, she mentioned to all of us during our class that not all people think and feel the same way. We all act differently. And
Right.
so there's always a different approach on how you will tell people about something or how you will engage with them. So you need to be strategic, and that's what I've learned so far. And hopefully, as I continue to study behavioral sciences, I will be more educated on how I can further inspire other people, not just through my voice, but also how I connect and engage with them.
All right. Mariel, nakakatuwa kasi I attended Al Gore's climate reality conference. Actually, trainee niya ako, no? We did not meet, but we're 800 of us or about 600 of us trainees at that time. And na-realize namin dun sa lectures niya that the Philippines is actually one of the most hit by
Yes.
extreme weather conditions, which is caused by anthropogenic climate change. Diba?
Yes, that's true.
Napaka-jargon nun. Climate change that is caused by our emissions, by our carbon use, and all of that. No? So, kailangan iparamdam sa tao na hindi lang ito talaga natural, but also because of the way we live.
Yes.
Diba? Na kailangan nating baguhin. Diba? Now, sige. Do you want to read now some of our comments and you have questions as well from your classmates, I think, that you want to ask our distinguished guests?
Sige po. But actually, before I get to the questions, I would like to say something about this, how we live as people. And during this pandemic po, diba, they're saying the hashtag new normal. And a lot of us wants to go back to the way we were living before, the old normal. And I actually attended a talk from Greenpeace last June, and they're now creating this campaign called the hashtag better normal. And for me, I realized that, oh nga naman no, kasi before this pandemic came, before we had this lockdown or yung quarantine, what we've been doing for the past years has already been, it's questionable. The way we live is actually the problem itself. It's the real issue that has led us to this moment. And the belief that everything happens for a reason. There's this famous quote, diba? Yung everything happens for a reason. But for me, that can be challenged. That quote itself can be questioned. Because before something can happen, we can do actually something about it before it occurs. Like for example po, yung naging issue sa Lebanon, yung may sumabog po ata sa Lebanon a month ago. I read a news article way back in 2013. Yung cargo ship po nun, yung shipment po that's carrying those explosives. Actually, the people have been petitioning for years na tanggalin na po yun sa kanilang port because there is a danger that it might explode someday. But what happened? No one listened. And now after a decade, it did happen. It exploded and it caused such a calamity. So when we say everything happens for a reason, you need to ask yourself, you need to question, does it really have to be that way? Does it really happen for a reason? Or can we actually do something before it can happen? And so that's how I see it now. Thanks to this course, thanks to social sciences, it is broadening my perspective and it is widening my understanding po of the world. And hopefully people will see it this way as well, that in social sciences, you're not just studying for the sake of graduating or getting a degree. You're studying because you want to understand people, and once you understand them, you want to make a change or do something about it that will make our world po a better place. Hashtag po better normal.
Yes, build back better. We cannot go
Yeah.
back to the old ways. And yung nakakatawa yan, you're emphasizing something. Yes, the ways that we live is the problem, but man is also the solution to it.
Yes.
Diba? And there are things, of course, this is another webinar, but there are ways that the solutions are at hand for our climate crisis. And, of course, government should lead. Kasi sila yung may kakayahan dyan that we eventually transition to a more sustainable way of producing energy. But more on that some other time. Sige, bago ko itanong yung tanong mo, gusto kong basahin yung quote ni Jenena Sol Mayor. How wonderful to hear that there are SUs or state universities in the Philippines to answer the call of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approaches. And very insightful discussion, especially kay Doc Racelis. Thank you po. Sige, ano yung tanong, Mariel, ng iyong classmate?
First question. Ano po ang opinion nyo regarding the lack of emphasis of social sciences in the secondary education, lalo na po from the establishment of the K-12 that is said to secure students to be ready for the working force after high school?
Okay, anyone can answer? Leslie, Mary?
Si Leslie, because she comes out of the education line.
Right. Oh, kasi that was also what I'm thinking. Leslie, what do you think of this? Itong secondary, itong pagtanggal ng maraming subjects na related sa Araling Panlipunan?
Sa tingin ko, it will always boil down to the fact that mahirap din talagang ipasok yung social sciences. May challenge, hindi mahirap, siguro may challenge dahil nagdi-deal ka sa mga bata na mag-a-adult na, but you cannot really treat them fully as adults. Pero humakbang na dun sa in preparation to college. Para nagigets mo yan, para nasa gets sila. So how do we deal with that?
Okay.
Diba?
There's a
How do we deal with that?
Lian, there's a dilemma of people felt that social issues might be too heavy for young kids or young adults at na parang high school. So parang yun yung ginawa nila. But what do you think is the effect of this now?
Sa tingin ko, hindi natin masasabing lahat Lahat talaga ay hindi nagbigay ng focus. May mga konting efforts sa ating mga teachers na maipahatid yung importansya pa rin ng pagpapatao. Kahit na anumang field pa yan na tinuturo mo, may it be hard sciences or soft sciences, pinapasok yung mga values ng iba't ibang disiplina. And sa tingin ko, para makita lang dapat yung kahalagahan nito sa pagpasok nila sa college, that we have to emphasize on that. Na, okay, tinuro natin itong mga general concepts na to sa senior high school. What will be the effect of this? Sa tingin ko parang more on questioning pa rin ako at this stage, but at the same time, we could delve on having a solution about this. But how do they make sense of it na when it comes to college na, kapag mas research na yung pinag-uusapan, kapag mas doon na sa specialization nila? So sa tingin ko, may mga efforts, pero kailangan mas ma-expose pa yung mga bata sa kung paano, how will they make sense of the world using the social sciences. At nakakatuwa, dahil itong sinasabing better normal that we are about to enter, nandito na tayo sa sitwasyon na ito, na may mga webinars na ganito, na pwede makapasok ang senior high school, pwede makapasok ang mga college students or mga graduate students.
Pwedeng gamitin.
Yes, as a material. Effort na hindi siya nanatili doon sa sistema ng hard copy, 'di ba? Pag sinabing Vibal, books 'yan. And it's a good start na itong pandemya na to nagbukas sa mga ganitong klase ng oportunidad. Hindi lamang iilang tao yung makaka-access sa kaisipan ni Dr. Racelis, sa kaisipan ni Sir Xiao Chua. So, yun po. Baby steps, but nandun na tayo.
But the big steps, Lian, really, will come from the Department of Education. Eh. Kaya
of
wala
course.
naman tayong kasama dito, so we cannot answer for
Yeah.
them. You have to do both ways, no? The small steps that we are doing now, and of course yung tinatawag natin na systemic.
Yeah.
Kailangan i-review the review of the K-12 curriculum.
Correct.
Ano bang napala natin dyan na tinanggal natin yung ibang subjects, including Philippine history, by the way. Diba? Mariel, give me another question.
Oh, can I comment just
yeah,
on
please,
that one?
please, Ma'am Mary,
just
please.
quickly, you know, actually, one of the great benefits of K-12 is that it puts sociology into the junior year. No, I think.
Oh, really? Yes.
So students, high school, senior high school, are taking sociology now, and so they, as Leslie points out, they learn kind of the basic issues, so that now we've discovered sa Ateneo that we have now many more entering freshies, we call them, who are interested in sociology. Well, anthropology, they know less, but definitely sociology, because they learned what it's all about. Before, they didn't know, so they would go to psychology and, you know, other disciplines because they knew those disciplines.
Yeah.
They didn't know what sociology was, but now they know because of high school. So now, but the issue, I think the follow-up issue there is the training of the teachers who teach sociology in high school. Because it's so important, that baseline is so important, and we depend on that to take them to the next level when they reach college, you know. So I think the Sociological Society is doing a lot to try to work with teachers who are teaching sociology so that they can really present it, you know, in the ways that both our panelists here are saying.
And just to add to that, K-12, hindi lang naman there are grades actually that we had, like tama kayo, Ma'am Mary. There are now freshmen who actually, you know, when I teach them Philippine history, kilala na nila sina Zio Salazar, Prospero Covar, Virgilio Enriquez, kasi apparently there's a subject called Disciplines in the Social Sciences. And yun yung mga pinag-aaralan nilang mga iba't ibang mga frames. So, do we have gains? Sige, Mariel, give me another one.
For the second question po, do you think there is a need for our culture as Filipinos to be compromised in addressing social issues like same-sex marriage and legalization of abortion?
Okay, can you repeat that? Parang compromised ang Filipino?
Do you think there is a need for our culture as Filipinos to be compromised in addressing social issues like same-sex marriage and legalization of abortion?
Ma'am Mary, what do you think?
Yeah, and if you mean compromise, meaning hesitant, no, or restrained, then no, we shouldn't be. I mean, every citizen has a right to discuss issues that that affect them. On this issue of abortion, you know, again, from the social science point of view, what's the evidence? The evidence is we have 800,000, and this is some years ago, women who go through abortions, many of whom, I think 1/4, wind up in hospitals for botched abortions, for all kinds of infections and so on, because it's unsafe, right? So one has to recognize that even if they have access now to family planning, still there will be those who for some reason, and they get pregnant, they want to have an abortion. So, because they're looking at it in much larger context. So what have the social scientists in this thing done? They've looked at other countries, including Catholic countries, where almost all, I think maybe we're the only ones, I'm not sure, but almost all have abortion rights, that women the notion that a woman should be able to decide about her own body. But the Catholic countries are more restrictive. They say only in the case of incest, rape, and sometimes psychological capacity, and it shouldn't go beyond a certain number of months, okay? And I think, and so mostly that's happening, so even in Catholic countries. So the church usually opposes it, but the public already thinks that, you know, and there's already a very strong view. And this is where social surveys like the social weather stations, the nationwide surveys on issues like this are very important, because then you know, what does the population think? So that's on abortion. On the LGBT, I mean, the latest is when Pope Francis himself has just said in his interview that he believes that LGBTs have rights civilly. And
Civil, yes.
Yes, they should have the right to have a civil union. They make a distinction. That's not marriage.
Not marriage.
It's a civil union which gives them legal rights to make claims on resources that belong to them, to visit them if they're sick, yung ganon, right? That they're human beings and they have rights. And he's saying that, you know, I think it's controversial, but it's going to have to change the whole discussion in the Philippines, where the notion is you can't discuss this. Now, I think, you know, what you're pointing out, compromiso, much less, because now people are going to say, aba, sabi naman ni Pope, and they're going to start with civil unions, but of course it will expand, because you have to look at the evidence. How do you limit the number of women who, because they're poor and see they're pregnant, you know, have no option but to do illegal abortions and die 1/4 of the time and get infected maybe the other half of the time. Look at the reality of life. What's the evidence? And that's what social scientists have to do. So that way you frame the question another way, you know,
right,
based on evidence.
At pwede yan na ilagay mo pa rin with the evidence that you have, i-frame mo pa rin in such a way that Filipinos would understand it. That's the goal of social scientists. Kasi when you always discuss it in Western points of views, in the way CNN does it or the West is doing it, mahihirapan ka. Kaya you also have to transition to making these issues closer to the people by making them understand na hindi lang ito Western, these are our problems and that we should deal with them. Oo. Sige.
No, just to add to that and that they themselves, when they begin to get a self-confidence, ability to articulate in public and speak in their own language, get them to speak about the issues. They're the most convincing when they know what they need to get across. No?
Totoo. Now, I would like to babatiin ko lang yung kaibigan natin dito, si Tricia May Alonso. Hello, thank you so much. Mariel, babasa lang ako ng isa from Catherine Torres de Guzman. A very good topic and discussion. Maraming bata ang walang konsensya, hindi nabuo ang konsensya. Sa ESP po, tinuturo yan. Okay, sige. Ayan, si Paul, sabi ni Neil Michael Cavite, na hindi taga Cavite, I'm sure, I am a proud student of Dr. Liwanag. Ooh, Leslie! Ako, I'm a proud student of Dr. Mary Racelis. I'm a Racelis boy. Oo. Mariel, sige, what's the next question of your classmate?
Sige, ito po. Does the concept of a woman being an ideal Maria Clara still applicable in the 21st century? Why do some people still think women should be like that? Example, mahinhin, poised, etc.
Ako, interesting makuha ang sagot ninyo dito, no? I mean, I have answers, but you know, I would like to really hear your thoughts on this. Ma'am Mary.
Yes, I think the modern theology is moving away from that, which is not to downgrade. It's not really downgrading Mother Mary. It's recognizing that she had certain. They point out, you know, the feminist theologians, Catholic, point out that she in her life, in the Magnificat especially, they quote her there that she is asserting herself. No, only that in the history of the church, very male-dominated, they always repressed the women's side. Consider Mary Magdalene, that notion that she was a prostitute, you know, that was part of the dynamic of the macho culture that the church evolved with, and still today has, you know, where women are in the church. I mean, you know, that's another story. So I think that concept is very much challenged by theologians, certainly Catholic theologians, and so it's changing. I mean, in Ateneo, if you know, see Rachel Sanchez, I think she has given a very good paper on what she calls doing a makeover of Mary Magdalene and Mary, the Virgin Mary. You know, that you have to see them in another light, and get this male-dominated definition of women aside to see how it, look at it in terms of the evidence and how you can argue. So very happily, I can say the notion of Mary as meek, submissive, as the role for women is now being eliminated in the whole feminist discourse.
Wow, very good, very good. Ikaw, Lian, what do you think?
Actually, Sir Xiao, merong tanong dito na mas nag-focus ako.
Yeah, sure.
May tanong dito. So, ano yung ginagawa niyong efforts? This is from Angeline Getiga.
Yeah.
Ano yung ginagawa niyong efforts sa pagpapakilala ng social sciences or soft sciences sa isang paaralan na nagbibigay diin sa hard sciences? Nabibigyan po ba ito ng pagpapahalaga sa paaralan? So maybe this person, estudyante ko to eh. This person speaking about yung namamayaning hard sciences nga dun sa school. So maraming efforts actually started 2019. 2018 ako pumasok sa Visayas State University. So 2019 we started with lecture series wherein faculty members of our department, we started little by little. We're in faculty members in our department would talk about our research in social sciences, and it's a good start. Also that's for dissemination, and then second is yung patuloy yung collaborations with research with other institutions from actually St. Louis, from De La Salle University, from St. Scholastica Manila, na parang hindi mamatay. Yun eh, parang hindi mamatay yung alab na yung na-feel ko for the field, alam mo yon, and patuloy yung network. And also we bring our colleagues from DLSU to Visayas State University because
yeah, I think we lost her. Pero nakakatuwa yan kasi if you look at alam mo, mahilig talaga siyang makipag-collaborate, no? Because if you look at Leslie Ann Liwanag in Google, you will see in Google Scholar how much work she had done, even if she is very young. So napakagandang halimbawa. That's why I guested her here to highlight her achievements as well. Mariel, what's your third question?
So for the final question po, what advice can you give to students who are studying both sociological theories and anthropological theories all at the same term?
Oh, so nagkasabay-sabay sociological theory and anthropological theory.
Yes,
Paano siya malilito siguro yan? Paano siya malilito? Paano siya hindi malilito?
Is there like a strategy po or a study habit that we should do that can help us po?
Ma'am Mary.
Well, no, I don't think there's not a necessary conflict. They actually overlap. You can study, reality, real society from many points of view, and these are really tools for you to help you think, right? So you can yourself make the integration. There's no kind of standard way. They offer what they have learned through their own research and thinking and theorizing. But in the end, it's not they versus us, kind of thing. But you learn from it, and then you decide, because it's a whole body of knowledge and thinking, and it's not, it's not really we encourage you, whichever field we're in, just to draw on that in terms of what you're observing in your real life. That's why now when I ask my students to write a paper on something which, there's a theory that's involved, we say, give an example from your observations, your own life, that illustrates what you're saying you have learned from this theory, so that it gets to be grounded. But let me add that I think that, we have to really look into the social media has tremendous advantages and potential. Yes. And young people, of course, are so aware of it and involved with it. And those people who say, they're so irresponsible, they're not respectful, you're right, because that's where they're anonymous, they can say anything they want. Well, that's the way it is, and but maybe you deal with that. But for me, it's how do you get some of them to begin to see the internet and social media as a way of this kind of discussion, getting, what's the evidence? Always ask the question, just like Leslie did as a 5-year-old. Why? That's really it. So look at the evidence and judge it. Learn what's fake and what's not. So use the social media. Don't, the older generation, you sort of blame it for why they seem undisciplined, ganon. Not at all. I mean, it's a tremendous tool and those of us who are in education, of course, have an advantage because we say, here is where you can go and evidence, and let's discuss it. And you're the ones who have to make the connections, because it's no more the teacher lectures and that's truth. Wala na yon. You have to be the one to draw on all sources, and the teacher helps guide you.
Nakakatuwa yan kasi, Ma'am Mary, what you've actually been doing is engaging now. Kasi who would have thought? I really did not think that you're going to engage people in the webinars. Diba? And well, we will not talk about her age, but you see naman how the experience of Ma'am Mary and the knowledge that she have acquired over the years as an institution in social sciences in the Philippines really would help us and inspire us just talking to you. Diba? Parang yan din yung nafe-feel ko pagkausap ko yung mga matatandang historians. But Mariel, can you read this comment in our that Paul gave us from Celsius Watchon? This is for Dr. Mary.
Okay. Hi, this is a very wonderful, insightful discussion. I have a question to Dr. Mary. Ma'am, when it comes to studying culture, shall we, at best, describe the essentials in the subculture, or can we go beyond description such as analysis and persuasion? Because there are issues about biases. Maraming salamat po.
Yes, thanks. Yes, of course we should go beyond description. It starts with descriptions because that's the evidence, right? And you have to do it well in as unbiased a way as possible, so that you can present it. That when you analyze it, that's what science is. Based on you reach certain conclusions because of the analysis of those data, and make a statement, and then other social scientists can, let's say, attack you or criticize you or add to you because they look at the evidence that you show you have, and they say, would I have interpreted it the same way? So yes, I would say it is the responsibility of a social scientist to go beyond description, because basically, which is not to denigrate NGOs. NGOs can describe, people can describe, but our pitch is we take that and we subject it. That's our role analytically, and say, what does it mean in society? Or what does it mean to the NHA, which is dealing with the urban poor, housing, so on, or those who don't want to give LGBT rights. What's the evidence, and how do you analyze it to show that probably they are marginalized because they're not listened to, but here's the evidence.
Yes, wow. Now, siguro before we give you your last statements for this discussion, I would like to parang mag-greet lang ako, Si Vilma Briones Chua, my mother, sabi niya, makasaysayang araw po. Thank you, Vibal. Hello po, Professor Xiao. Mabuhay po kayo. Be safe always, And then, of course, si Andre Lupera is also watching with us. Mario Flores. There's so many people. Thank you. Hindi na namin kayo lahat mababahati. We cannot greet you all. But thank you always for being with us, for joining us in our discussions. Mariel, do you want to give your parang thoughts about all the discussions that we have? And by the way, Paul Baloha have meron siya comment dito, Wonderful discussion daw. Thank you, Paul. Sige, Mariel.
Out of everything we've discussed, for me, as a student, I felt more inspired to study behavioral sciences. I feel more motivated to dive deeper into the subjects, and actually po, during the beginning of my term as a first-year student last year, akala ko mahirapan ako kasi ang daming babasahin, mga readings, but as I went on with the subjects, I'm actually enjoying it. kahit ang daming readings, kahit magpa-exam yung professor namin, I'm just enjoying and really taking into heart everything that I'm learning. And as my ending statement, the only advice I could give to students who are watching right now is to make sure that the course you will choose, you will enjoy it, you will have fun, be happy with what you're doing, because eventually, regardless of all the paperwork, the requirements, it will all pay off, and you will see it not as a source of stress, but as a source of learning, for you to learn, because that is the essence of a course, for you to learn in the future to become a better individual in society.
Yun, the focus is really how can you contribute to society? You study society, you study the social sciences, para alam mo rin ano yung lugar mo sa lipunang ito. And by, of course, understanding the place of others as well. Diba? Yan, nag-agree sa'yo si Wilbert Letriro, si Merlin Abelia. No, maraming salamat kasi ang dami-dami from different parts of the country. 'Di ba? Len Penjien Patombona, Doc Liwanag is teacher daw niya 'yan. Amalia Caballero, Catherine Torres de Guzman. Hello, Maricar Arimbay. Siyempre, nag-aano na ako eh. Thank you so much everyone for joining us. Marites Lerio Ababaw. Thank you. Now, we would like to go to ang ating teacher na si Leslie from the Visayas State University. Les, are you back?
Yes, I'm back.
Yeah, kahit hindi mo nabuksan siguro. Ayan, okay. Baka fresh.
Sige.
For the ending, no? Sige, ano nangyari? I mean, what's your last, nawawalan daw ng kuryente. So, ano iiwan mo? Ano iwan mo sa ating?
Ang iwan natin, yun nga, gustong-gusto ko yung sinabi ni Mariel, Mariel ba name niya?
Yes, wala. Mariel Prion, yes.
Mariel, na kahit anumang kursong kunin mo, ay talagang mamahalin mo dapat. Kasi yun yung magiging rason kung bakit or magkakaroon ng sense of fulfillment. No, kung ano ka bilang isang tao, anong contribution mo sa mundo na ito. And sa tingin ko yung contribution or yung takeaway dito ng social sciences is that pre-pandemic, pandemic, or after pandemic, social sciences is there for us to offer new perspectives and new ways of understanding our society. That it would explain why, it would explain what and how are these things. Why are these things existing? Why are these things happening around us? Na parang it would make us sane. Na parang may mga explanation sa lahat ng mga nararamdaman natin, sa lahat ng naiisip natin. And yun yung isa sa mga takeaways ko na maaring ambag at kontribusyon ng ating larangan. So yun
Maraming
po.
Salamat, no? The calming effect ang tawag ko dyan of the social sciences.
Yes.
In a way, because we know that we've been through this pandemic before. We've had even worse situations like wars, poverty, and all of that.
Yeah.
But we're still here. Diba? When you study societies, we're still here. There's a certain hope that things can be better. That there were things that were done before. Especially, there are a lot of studies that led to changes in the attitudes of people. Social sciences itself will not change society. But when you teach social sciences, and the minds of the people will change because of that. Diba? For the better, I think that's a contribution of our discipline. Maraming salamat, Lian. And of course, my teacher, my sensei, my mentor, in listening more to the people's perspectives about their lives and their faith and their their role in the society. Dr. Mary Racelis.
Okay, as a last word, let me say, just looking at the pictures, I realized there are 4 generations of social scientists on this program. From me, from the 60s to see Mariel now as a sophomore, no? And Leslie in between, and then you were my student, and now they were your student, and Leslie was your student, and so on. I mean, that's a wonderful progression. 4 generations of social scientists we confronted different situations during our lifetime, but we had to help define it. What did it mean to society in our day? And maybe in the future, and we're not great at predicting anything, but still, we have a basis. So each generation has its own challenge. And you don't have to always follow what the previous generation said, because you're the generation that has to find the new ways of thinking, because society has changed, and therefore you have to think also. So I must say I'm very heartened and very inspired by the future of social sciences when we have young people like, especially like Leslie and Mariel and Xiao. Compared to me, you're young. So you're also in the young people category, And I think together, this wonderful intergenerational discussion, I think benefits us all. I've learned so much from all of you, and with great appreciation of what the challenges you're facing, but that you're willing to face it. And just finally, what Leslie emphasized, and I think also Marielle, you have to love what you do. It's terrible if you have to sell, let's say, corned beef. Not to denigrate that, because when people do that, they have to live. But when you love what you do in whatever field, you do much better. You become a role model, like all of you are, in your generation and in the future. So thank you for the opportunity, and I wish you all well.
Wow, I'm speechless. I'm actually speechless. I don't know how to end this, pero basically, natumbok ni Ma'am that I think that it's not really talked about, but the role of social sciences really is to make people human, but not only that, diba? Is to put love in the equation in many ways. Because when you listen to people, diba? When you listen to people, when you are concerned about their well-being, that's why you study them, and that's why you bring them out in the open so that they will be solved. That's what Jose Rizal did in the Noli Me Tangere. Diba? When we talk about knowing situations of people, their culture, that's what Isabelo de los Reyes did. And of course, kasama ko si Leslie when we studied that, when they were defining who the Filipino is, when they were creating the nation. Diba? And when you look at how we have gone far because of the many, many things that change attitudes because of social science studies about sex, diba? About gender, that in this discussion, there are 3 voices of women and I am only one. Diba? And diba? It's really a girl power discussion here. And in fact, if people are going to look at the recent guests, mas marami talagang babae. And because I really want to emphasize that, malaki na ang role ng babae ngayon sa ating lipunan. Although, marami pa tayong dapat gawin. There are just so many things that we still have to deal with urban poor, with women, with LGBTQI and all of that, with ourselves. The society in itself, there are things na parang binago na natin pero hindi pa pala nagbago, and we're back to sometimes our racist tendencies and our tendencies to belittle other people. I think the social sciences ang pinakamagandang dinadala nito sa pagtuturo ng lipunan sa elementary at high school, sa Araling Panlipunan, ay pagpapakatao. At pagpapakatao na nagbubunsod sa pag-ibig sa kapwa at sa bayan na tinuturo ni Gat Andres Bonifacio at ng Katipunan nung tinatatag nila yung bansa. And basically, the heart of everything is this: the spirit of liberal arts and social sciences created the nation and will continue to make the nation better if we listen to evidence, if we listen to each other. Wow. Kaya marami po salamat. Thank you, Mariel, for joining me. It's been an honor to have a young beauty queen, but also a very beautiful intellectual to be with me today. And of course, beautiful then, Leslie Ann Liwanag, and forever young and beautiful and eternal, the lovely Dr. Mary Maselli. So, well, of course, in the name of Vibal Group, Paul and everyone in ano, nako, malapit na magtanghalian, pero maraming salamat at sinamahan niyo po kami. Everything that we do here in Vibal Group, Kasaysayan, Kaysaya, kayo po ang aming lagi iniisip. The teachers, na ma-enrich tayo, na matuto tayo sa isa't isa. Hindi lang ako bilang teacher, hindi lang kami ang teacher. Lahat tayo mag-usap, magkaroon ng usapan na nai-enrich ang ating pakikipagkapwa-tao. Nagbubukasan tayo ng kalooban. At binubuksan din natin yung kalooban natin sa iba pag tinuro natin ang mga natutunan natin sa isa't isa. Ako po si Xiao Chua na nagsasabing ang kasaysayan ay hindi basta-basta kwento. Sa social science, mga kaibigan, meron itong metodo. Magtanong, mag-imbestiga, magkumpara para makinig at makipagkapwa-tao. Kaya, again, ako po si Xiao Chua para sa Vibal Group. Kasaysayan! Kaysaya! Bye-bye!